Hi, everyone. This is an episode that is for those of you in the audience who are considering perhaps for yourself getting a circumcision, or you have to make a decision about this for your children. So I decided to look into this, and I want to talk about myths that are both legal and health-wise. And this will be episode 1. We're going to cover the topics: the stigma of circumcision due to Paul, the Abrahamic Covenant and circumcision, and then the ignorance of health benefits. And you'll see why I got into this issue. All right, so here's the stigma from Paul. It's Philippians 3, verse 2. Beware of the dogs, beware of the evil workers, beware of those who practice mutilation. So mutilation is his shorthand term for circumcision. And look where he puts that: people who are dogs, evil workers, and you beware of them. So he's putting them in a dumpster fire of evil people who need to be burned in hell. It's almost clearly what he's saying. So is that true, or is this a thing that actually a Christian who isn't Jewish can consider? Not because it's mandated. We're going to get into whether it's mandated or not, but for health reasons alone. And you'll see it's now proven the fact that it's better for your health as far as the American Pediatric Association is concerned. And so we'll take a look at the evidence now. All right. So I just want to talk to you about the law, though. The law, in my reading, and I'm going to prove it to you from the book of Genesis that this is correct, is that if you were a sojourner in Israel, you would have to be circumcised in only 2 situations. And that's where, if you wish to participate in a Passover feast at someone's home, you must be circumcised. That's in Exodus 12, verse 48. And also, one who wished to enter the temple of Jerusalem, you would have to be circumcised. That's in Ezekiel 44:9. It was also in the law, the Mosaic law. And but there is no more temple, so the really only rule you have to worry yourself about is the Passover rule. All right, now how did I get into this? Well, I was listening to a audio presentation by Candace Owens, who I greatly respect. Wonderful, brilliant mind, very good researcher, and I'm sure she's going to be able to provide evidence of this. So I decided to research this on my own, and I actually couldn't confirm this statement, but this is her statement. First up, I think now she's not in favor of circumcision for children, just so it's clear. And if you want to hear her side of the story, please do so. I'm not here to exclude her side of the story. I literally took this statement she makes and I try to research it, and I'm going to show you what I found. And it's not consistent with what she found. So that's, it could be I didn't do a good enough research. Okay. So, and I'm going to try to reach out to her later. But I think the authorities that I did find are such of high quality that I'm pretty sure that in this case they would not be unreliable. We'll see. So she said in this video, first up, now she's saying what a parent should do if you went to the doctor. She would say, first up, I would ask them, then explain why European countries which do not default to circumcising their male infants have lower rates of penile cancer and infections. Okay. So I could not find that. And I typed, you Google stuff and you try to find stuff. But what actually came up were actually proofs that were the opposite. And what I found was John Hopkins Medicine had this webpage, and it's entitled Greater Benefits of Infant Circumcision. And it's dated October 15, 2012. So that's 11 years ago. The science has not changed, and it's gotten more confirmatory. It says this: greater benefits of infant circumcision. Commentary: benefits extend into adulthood, says John Hopkins, an adolescent medicine specialist. So that also means, as you'll see, that intervention, even when you're an adult, obviously the younger the better, is you will have better outcomes in your health if you are a male and you're circumcised. All right. And but again, if you're a Paul Christian, you have been told that it's a mutilation, which implies there's no medical benefits. So you may be surprised to learn that Paul's implications are false. In other words, it does have medical benefits. God had a good reason. He knows how the human body works. And so for his holy people, he wanted them to be circumcised. But it was not a mandatory thing on anybody else other than Abraham's heirs. We'll see that in a second. Now, here are the parties bound to the Abrahamic Covenant. So this is another area of confusion I've had. Actually, I've had the most heated disagreements I've ever had are over this issue. So I decided I'm going to calmly look at it, both the law and the health benefits, so to advise all of us what's our legal obligation, what's the health benefits versus the costs. Okay, so let's look at the law given Moses. And the law of Moses starts with the book of Genesis, which is the first book of the 5 books of Moses that is called the Torah. So in the Torah, we read in Genesis 17, verse 1, and when Abram was 90 years old and 9, the Lord, that's Yahweh, appeared to Abram and said unto him, I am the Almighty God, walk before me and be thou perfect. And I will make my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply your seed exceedingly. So I just want you to understand that this is where the actual covenant of Abraham occurs with God Yahweh, and Paul claimed it was in Genesis 15, which is another thing. That's not a covenant because it's not actually saying what Paul said it was said. We've gone through that before. So this is the actual covenant of Abraham, and it requires perfect obedience. So just so you can see how far off Paul was looking at the mistranslation in Greek of Genesis 15:6, where it really only says Abraham believed God and counted it, the promise of a child in old age, to God as righteousness. But I digress. Let's stay on point here. So anyway, I will make my covenant between me and thee, and will multiply thee exceedingly, meaning his seed, his children. Genesis 17, verse 7. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee in their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto you and to your seed after you. So now, please listen. If you are a Gentile, you should just also have a perspective on what is a Jewish person's obligation. It's everlasting. It can't go away. There can't ever come a covenant or a prophet, maybe Paul, you think is a prophet, and he can say there's no more Jew or Gentile. This is an everlasting covenant. This cannot be broken. And while Paul says circumcision is nothing and uncircumcision is nothing, I mean, it's it's uh it's just a covenant. And the covenant obligation was full, perfect obedience and return for this everlasting covenant with God. What he's going to do. He's going to bless all the nations through him. We'll see. Now, all of these other covenants prior to verse 10 were will. Let's go back another. Let's see here. It says, I will, verse 2, I will make my covenant. In verse 7, it says, I will establish. But now he's establishing this covenant, verse 10. He's using present tense. This is my covenant, which you shall keep between me and you and your seed after you. So who's subject to the Abrahamic covenant? Any of the Gentiles? No, because it's the seed of Abraham. It has to be anybody. The nations, by definition, was everybody who wasn't of Abraham's seed. That's by definition what nations or goy means. And so that excludes all the Gentiles from this covenant. That we are not part of this covenant. However, it would bring blessings to the nations. But again, there is no covenant with anyone but his seed. All right. So now, again, we're going to go into some of the discussions of the proof and evidence I found. I wanted to find a little bit more current information than the 2012 document from the U.S. Pediatrics Association. We'll see more about that later, where they made a big revolution in 2012. And again, I'm testing Candace Owens' research, but again, I haven't done enough research to disprove her, so I'm not going to say I've disproved her. But what I did prove, to my satisfaction, is there's very high quality evidence that circumcision is a great benefit, and it's a great health benefit. So, but you kind of have to study and learn what's going on. So let's start with this article from 2020. It's USA and UK. Differences on neonatal circumcision by Dominic Hodgson, 29 April 2020. And here's the abstract. The popularity of neonatal circumcision has declined significantly in the last half century in the UK, but it persists in the USA, where most boys are still circumcised soon after birth. So I just want to say to you, I found more negative things in the UK because they don't want to pay for circumcisions. But the U.S. policy is to have any insurance you purchase has to pay for circumcision. If you have health insurance and you have a child, you will have it. And I suppose even if you're an adult and you want to have it done, it's actually promotes your health. So long term, you will have less visits to the doctor and hospital. So that's a positive thing. So I cannot imagine, people spend a couple $100 to remove a wart. This is probably a smaller, much less skin than amount of a piece of a wart. So anyway, let's just continue here. So the UK is not as pro because they're a nationalized health system and they don't want to spend any money on anything they don't have absolute certainty about. So no, you got to pay. If you want that, you got to pay for it. Okay. But it persists in the USA where most boys are still circumcised soon after birth. Okay. And I was too in 19, I won't give out the entire year. I don't like giving out my birth year, but let's say it was in 57. And in 1957 in New York City, all boys were circumcised. That's the way it was. And you'll see why. You'll see there's a doctor earlier than that who found the health benefits, and it brought back the practice of circumcision in the United States on people who aren't Jewish people of Jewish heritage, but for the health benefits that were found. In this article, the author considers why the practice is now so different in the two countries and explores the pros and cons of neonatal male circumcision. So that gives us a great idea that we're going to hear the pros and cons, not just one point of view. So let's see. At the end of the 19th century, neonatal circumcision became commonplace, first in the USA and then the UK. It became so popular that in the first half of the last century, 84% of the boys from the best-known British public schools had the procedure performed. I mean, that's pretty good. However, in the last 70 years, rates have dropped dramatically in the UK, while in America, the majority of boys still have their foreskins removed shortly after birth. And then this gives a little bit of history, and this is what I found fascinating. It is said to have been the New York orthopedic surgeon Louis Sayre, 1820-1900, who was responsible for the cultural shift to neonatal circumcision. Pause. So that explains to me now why New York City boys, I was always curious, we weren't Jewish. Why was I circumcised? And now we know why. New York was the first one to adopt a statewide policy of circumcision for boys. In 1870, Dr. Sayre was asked to assess a 5-year-old boy who was finding it difficult to walk. Dr. Sayre concluded that the child was suffering from reflexive neurosis, a popular diagnosis at the time due to an abnormally sensitive, and I'm not going to use the word, which was treated by relieving his imprisoned glands. And I'm not going to repeat the word. I don't want to get our video struck. News of the ensuring cure quickly spread, and the procedure was performed for a range of conditions before becoming routine at birth, particularly in certain strata of society where germ phobia was widespread. The practice soon crossed the Atlantic to the UK, and like in the USA, was more commonly performed in the higher social classes. In America, popularity of the procedure increased to a zenith in the 1960s when it is suggested that 83% of American boys were circumcised. However, in the UK, two factors seemingly contributed to the demise of the practice. Firstly, when the NHS, National Health Service, was introduced in 1948, that was their nationalized medicine system, there was a rationalization of services to include provision of care only to those procedures with clear benefits. So now the standards went up. We're not going to pay for anything that's not clear. And that's where circumcision is going to disappear as a result. Secondly, the work of the Scottish pediatrician Donald Gardner, who had published a 1949 paper, The Fate of the Foreskin, which seemingly established the need for a natural history of the development of the foreskin in boyhood. So he's trying to say, there's some importance to having the foreskin. If you don't have it, you're not the same man you could be. But it was a natural history type study, not scientifically based, apparently. The NHS will currently only fund circumcision for medical reasons, i.e. when there is an underlying pathology. Attitudes to neonatal circumcision between the USA and UK are now very different amongst doctors and indeed the public. So which of us has it right? Well, I'm not going to get too far into that. I'm going to tell you should research some of this yourself, but I'm going to guide you about this. So this article continues, and it's going to tell us the American Academy of Pediatrics said this in 2012, and it switched its policy 100%. And this is what it said: preventative health benefits outweigh risk of the procedure, but are not great enough to recommend routine circumcision for all male newborns. Okay, so they're going to, in every case, leave it up to the parents to make the decision, which is fine by me. I think that's the way it should be, unless it's absolutely, a health risk to my child or something that you can't leave it up to the parent to make the decision. But anyway, that's where it completely changed. And they could honestly tell the person the benefits outweigh the risk of the procedure. Procedure is very, I mean, literally, it's like removing a mole, right? How many people die from having a mole removed? All right, so I wanted to dig a little deeper into that issue, and I found this article, Canadian Neurological Association Guideline on the Care of the Normal Foreskin and Neonatal Circumcision in Canadian Infants. This is a 2018 article from NIH.gov, and this is what the one of the paragraphs said. Circumcision is the oldest planned operative procedure in the history of the human civilization, but there continues to be a lack of consensus and strong opposing views on whether universal neonatal circumcision should be adopted as a public health measure. The recent American Academy of Pediatrics guideline on male circumcision, which is what we've been looking at, reversed its prior stand, meaning prior to what I showed you, prior to 2012, it had a different view, stating that, quote, the health benefits of newborn male circumcision outweigh the risks, which is what I quoted you earlier, and justify access to the procedure if the parents so choose, as I mentioned. This recommendation was primarily based on the impressive results from African trials demonstrating the protective effect of MC against human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, and sexually transmitted infections, STIs. So I think that's to say that it's not still without some controversy, but I think it's not a controversy that the results are good. It's whether anybody's going to pay for it. And it's an operation. It probably requires a hospitalization for a short period of time and special care of multiple people, maybe some anesthesia. So it's not without its own cost. Now, I want to show you from the 2020 paper from Dominic Hodgson that I already brought up is a really dramatic benefit on UTI, urinary tract infections, which is pretty much plagues a lot of people. The AUA, I'm sure that's some organization, quotes at least a tenfold reduction in the risk of UTI between 3 and 6 months for circumcised boys. So that's an amazing difference. So imagine you had 100 boys, you circumcise 50 of them, and the boys who have no circumcision will have a 10 times higher rate than the boys who had circumcision for UTI tract infection. It has been estimated that this risk is in the order of 1 to 2%, and as such, to prevent a single infection over 100 boys required to undergo circumcision. So I guess what they're saying is it's still very unusual to have a UTI, but this percentage ratio, if you get circumcision, is you'll basically have, it's a 10 times less risk of getting a UTI as an infant. The case for circumcising boys with coexisting anomalies of the urinary tract is much stronger. Okay, so I don't know what they mean by coexisting anomalies, just to be fair here, with the number needed to treat to confer benefit being only 4 in those with a high-grade vesico-ureteric reflux. Well, I'm going to guess that's what it is. If you have an anomaly of a high-grade vesico-ureteric reflux, I'm not a doctor. I don't know these terms. So, but that would be where you get the same benefit. So that urinary tract infection seems to be a significant benefit. And based on if it has coexisting anomalies such as that, I assume that's going to be very much more clear how many circumcisions have to be done to prevent one episode. So 100 have to be there to prevent 4 if they're coexisting anomalies. And then here's the same article. Other sexually transmitted disease. There is evidence of a modest decrease in human papilloma virus, HPV, in men who have been circumcised. So there's your adult male. So if you're an adult male, you're considering being circumcised, you can reduce the human papilloma virus, but not improving clearance of the acquisition of the virus. So the clearance will take just as long as if you didn't take you didn't have circumcision, but the decrease in the ratio or the percentages of getting it in the first place are down. So recovery is not changed, but the percent that get this HB virus goes down. It is not clear whether circumcision at a neonatal stage would provide protection into adulthood. as to sexually transmitted diseases. What they mean. The CUA concluded that it's likely that the widespread adoption of the HPV vaccine and behavioral modification would have a greater impact on the consequences of HPV than universal adoption of neonatal circumcision. So, if you are one of those people who think you're going to take an HPV vaccine, then you are being told that there's probably a trade-off there, that you can just go with the vaccine instead of using circumcision as your choice of reducing your risks. All right, and there is currently no evidence of the protective effect of male circumcision regarding the transmission of gonorrhea and syphilis. Similarly, there is no evidence to support neonatal circumcision in the prevention of the transmission of herpes simplex virus. So those are not benefited. All right, so we recapped episode 1. We have a lot more to go through in the future, but I think this gives you a good overview of these 3 topics. We see there's a stigma of circumcision due to Paul. He called it a mutilation, which would imply that it has no benefit at all. But now we can see there's significant health benefits to it, to the extent that it's been mandated in many parts of the United States for a long period of time. And now they're realizing, even more importantly, since 2012, the American Pediatric Association now recommends it. And that's a big change from where they were before. And they believe the benefits outweigh the costs. And so the stigma hopefully is going away, and the falsity of the claim that it's mutilation, meaning having a procedure with no medical benefits and permanently alters the child to their damage, is false. And so there's another example where Paul does not prevail over the word of God. Abrahamic Covenant, we found that doesn't require you to, if you're an adult male who's not an ethnic son of Israel, you are not obligated to be circumcised unless you want to go to a Passover dinner and celebrate. And that was the traditional date, by the way, that Christians used to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, was on the Passover. And so if you went to a meal with a circumcised, with a Jewish person, you would have to be at their home. You would have to have been circumcised back then. But you can always avoid it if you don't want to do it. And there's no compulsion on you doing it, but you can see that God knows better than all these mockers and sneerers and claims that it's mutilation. And so God's been vindicated it took time. And clearly these weren't people who cared anything about the Bible or about God or anything. They just simply tried it out, and it worked better. It was better for the health of the children, and it's a small procedure at birth or a couple of days after birth. Now, the ignorance of health benefits, we showed you that there's a huge ignorance of parents to the 2012 Pediatric Association conclusion and why, and some of the examples they provided. I just provided you a few. There's other health benefits, and we'll go through those in more detail in the next episode. So God bless. I hope that helps anybody who's an adult who's thinking about this, and even a parent who's thinking about it. But bear in mind that Candace Owens is said that in Europe, they had a greater incidence of problems. And so, but I haven't been able to find it yet. So I trust her research, but maybe she didn't read it correctly, or maybe it's old data, or maybe it's statistics sampling. I don't know. But by the way, a lot of medical procedures have some negative side effects and some benefits. And whatever she's indicated may still not be enough of a risk to not do, meaning there may not be a great disadvantage based on those studies, so that you would negate the decision to go ahead and get circumcised. So we'll see about that. I'll do more research and report back to you. But just be aware that it's something you can consider legitimate to do if you're a male adult and of any age. Frankly, any male of any age, you can do it. If mom and dad, you're a young person, you want to do it, and you're underage, you can ask mom and dad, I'd like to do this. And if you haven't done it already. All right. God bless everybody. Hope that helps. Ciao. Bye.